But it wasn't really until I was probably at university and doing an English and drama degree. So I had been interested in drama. I thought I wanted to be a designer, I think, or a writer. That I got to do a bit of directing. And I directed a play called Wit by Margaret Edson, which I sort of picked up and read and within seconds thought I could visualise it all. The reason that theatre still exists now, even amongst having film and television, is because there's something really immediate about it, and it's happening right then and live, and anything could sort of happen. And you can, these long-running plays or successful plays that come back around, you can revisit them, but you will have inevitably changed a little bit as a person the second viewing, or you'll see something different the second time, and so they're still fresh and new. And I think that's what excites people about working in the theatre and why they keep on coming back to it, because it's dangerous. It's not sort of like on celluloid and you can edit away and make it look all pretty. It can fail, and it can be it depends on its audience that night what will happen. It's a complete conversation between who's sat out there and who stood on the stage. I'm most passionate about making work that feels like it's going to jolt an audience into something, whether it's to question something about their own lives or make them see the world in a different way. And usually that's about exploring a subject matter that's not normally discussed around the dinner table, or isn't something that the theatre are afraid of shining a light on. And I think for me it's about putting myself in a place as a theatre maker where I feel a bit scared and a bit anxious, and like it's a risk to make it, because it may not be my opinion that I'm portraying, but it's something that feels like it needs to be discussed. I think most of the new writing that I come across that makes me kind of get excited is that work that tries to look at the world through a different lens or from a different angle, and tries to explore sort of lives, subject matters that maybe I haven't even been aware of myself, and that I can learn something from. If I can learn something, then an audience can. To be able to achieve that sort of dream of being able to sort of create targeted work for an audience, a lot of my work is about collaborating with people that excite me and that I feel can kind of take a leap of faith. It could also be a classical text that you can sort of look at how it's still relevant today and give it that spin or spin it on its head. But you need to have the support network to take that leap. And whether that's the theatre itself saying, yeah, try it, or whether it's a writer going, oh, I could totally write that story or that person. Or it's an actor coming to you and saying, I've always wanted to tell the story of my life, or there's a person from history that has really inspired me and I think they don't get a platform like they should. And I'd like to be able to give that platform to those people. So a lot of theatre that's made these days is really dependent on funding, whether it's the large scale or the fringe. It can give a level of quality that you wouldn't be able to achieve without that funding. And that's not to say people will make theatre no matter what. It just means the scale will be reduced, the number of actors that can be involved, the level of design. But it will always, if people want to tell a story, they're going to make it. They're going to tell that story. Personally, when I've tried to make work without funding, things have suffered, because you're then also having to negotiate people's time scales that they can work for free. I hate asking people to work for free, but then I work for free myself, just because I'd rather be working for free than sat on my sofa at home sort of feeling sorry for myself. And also a little bit like anyone who loves their job, these poor nurses that work for hours and hours and hours and will work, they don't say 5 o'clock it's finished, I'm going home. It's because they're caring people, they want to keep on working. And I think as theatre makers, we want to tell that story, so we'll keep on putting those hours in. But then people can take advantage of that as well. And I think also funding bodies can recognise it and say, well, do they need it? Like, would they make this happen anyway? So I think it is possible. It's just harder, and maybe the work does suffer. I've only ever had funding for a couple of projects, and usually in the beginning stages, something the research and development stage. then once you've gone beyond that, it's sort of, now it's you've got to do it all. And I think you've really got to get a great producer involved, someone who understands how to approach private investors, advertisers, sponsors who can get involved. But then the more people you get involved that aren't a funding body, the more voices you've got involved. And we can't have that in it, or I don't want it to be about this, or maybe we should be aiming somewhere higher. Or so it's then you're compromising in another level. But I don't think it's essential to have funding, and I think a lot of those young companies that are coming up have done it without. But certainly they maybe wouldn't be respected to the standard they are now without having had that investment. Passion projects are fantastic, but they can also wear you down and work you to the bone. It's important to do those projects that they're not money makers. They're not something that's going to catapult you into the, whatever you think making it is. But if you're going to learn something from it and you're going to gain something from it artistically and creatively, then you should definitely do it. There's also a balance to be struck, recognising that this is your passion project, but it might not be someone else's, that you are going to have to compromise with what they can give you, but it might just take longer. It might just mean that you want to take it to Edinburgh Fringe next year, but it can't be next year. It's going to have to be in 2 years because the people you want to work with have other jobs that are getting paid for, and just don't feel like if you don't do it now, you've failed in some way. And it can be put on the back burner for years. Like I've got loads of projects that I've gone, need to do that, and you'll never know that something will pop up and they'll go, we've got this sort of space for a week, so-and-so, such and such, or we've got some money put aside for some reason, and you go, wow, there's that project that I've always had in the back of my mind. Maybe this is the time. So never sort of strike it off and go, oh, that's never going to happen, or I failed. Because you never know when it might become useful. So something that someone said to me years ago is that theatre isn't a democracy, and which at first I went, I don't know if I agree with that, and then over the years I've recognised that he's totally right. There can't be a democracy in theatre because there's always going to be someone who's leading it. There's the artistic director, or there's the funding body, or there's whoever. So there is this sort of structure in place, which is a useful structure. I mean, we have it in rehearsal rooms. We have a director and we have actors, and there is, to an extent, a democracy, whether it's a collaborative process or a devising process. There's always someone who's got the final say. The designer has the final say on the design, etc. I don't think it's like a hierarchy. Hierarchy is necessarily a negative thing. But when that hierarchy is then either exploiting those below, or there's no shift as to who has that voice at the top, that's when it becomes a problem. There are some really exciting things happening within the industry at the moment around regional theatre, that for quite a few years it's been felt very London-centric, and it was something that I avoided for a long time, living in Bristol for 6 years, quite reluctant to move to the capital because I thought, actually, there are brilliant Theatremakers all over the place, that what happens is people tend to it just becomes homogenised, and actually we aren't really exploring the talent that is out there. And what I'm seeing more and more now I have moved to London is everyone else leaving and taking what they've learned from being here and maybe training here, or having just the exposure to lots of different sorts of theatre and taking it elsewhere. And that reviewers and your Lynn Gardners and people writing articles in big newspapers are recognising that. And they say, if you want to see some of the best theatre in the country, get on a train and go up to Newcastle and go to York and go to Leeds to the West Yorkshire Playhouse, that the audiences in those areas are as cultured and as deserving of great art as people in London. And actually what's happening with the West End, getting such long-running, mostly musical shows, it's appealing to tourist audiences. What was happening at the Globe last year was fascinating in regards to that. They brought in an artistic director who wasn't about just pleasing the tourists and was about trying something new and fresh, and it wasn't embraced with open arms. And so they've had to find their route through how to please both the artistic side of it and the money-making side of it. Out in the regions, there's a little bit less risk out there. You're not being exposed to as many national newspapers. People are trying new things that they're not going to lose money on if the audience is 50% full. whereas in London there's a big pressure. And because of that, it's thriving, and the younger people are coming up into it as well. Younger and younger artistic directors of those theatres with brilliant ideas who have maybe never trained in theatre, maybe went to university and studied classics and have come and just loved theatre. And also how many more of those artistic directors are females. We're seeing it in London, obviously we've got Josie Rourke and Vicky Featherstone really leading that female artistic director voice. Then also at the Young Vic, it's having our first black artistic director is a brilliant thing as well. So talking about a hierarchy and trying to shift who has the kind of control of what's being spoken about in that building. Hopefully now we're seeing a sort of shift in the patriarchy. We're going to have a very different future in the theatre. One of my proudest moments in my sort of theatre making career so far has been on a project I worked on earlier this year actually with a group of 30 homeless people. So they were either currently homeless or they'd experienced homelessness in the past, or had indirectly maybe a family member had experienced it. So quite an age range. I think our youngest member was 19 and our oldest was 75, and from all over the world as well. She was Argentinian. We had a chap who was originally from Somalia, and I was taken aback by the creativity within that group, and actually what it meant as a theatre maker is less about putting your own creativity into something but facilitating others. And it was a long process. It was over several months, and there was a lot of shifting dynamics within that group over the time, which was challenging. But what they achieved at the end, and actually the finished piece for me, not just as a kind of cathartic experience, was also one that was really beautiful. They were put in a situation where they felt safe to share their stories and to be silly and have fun, but also to work together, which is something, being homeless is such an isolating thing. I think for them that was the big part of it, and to be able to sit back at the end of it and be like, wow, that was such a journey that I went on, and also at the end of it is something that is valuable, and the responses it got from the audience were how actually this is what theatre should be.